before we kick into all this stuff, I want to thank you. We've been doing this this is like, I think maybe our 12th session that we've been doing here since COVID-19 started, and really just an opportunity for us to come together. And I love the fact that there's been, I think relationships built, some familiarity that's taken place. And I really appreciate you guys' engagement in all this. And I trust it's been helpful to you. And the thing I want to just remind us all about, to remind you guys especially with, is that, at EFCA West, what we've kind of as a staff said is that our role, we are not the church. The church plays a unique function as the bride of Christ. Our role is to help the church, and the way we say it is to help the church, to help our churches fulfill the mission of God in their communities, in their context. And we say, we just do it in three ways. We do it by helping the churches strengthen their leadership community, by helping churches plant new churches, and by helping them include all people. And that's really it. It's strengthening the leadership community, helping plant new churches, and helping reach out to all people. That's what our sweet spots are. That's what we want to continue to do. And so really in the area of strengthening the leadership community, that's what this is an aspect of what we're going to talk about today. And, in Acts, the main goal, by the way, too, for us, just as EFCA West, and what I hope that over the years, you will come to say, hey, I really feel like EFCA West played this role in our lives, is out of Acts 16:5, where it's talking about Paul and Timothy and going on their way. And it says this: so the churches were strengthened in the faith and they increased in numbers daily. They were strengthened in the faith and they increased in numbers daily. And that's just what we hope to be able to see in our district. So anyway, with that being said, I want to welcome Nancy Moore to our Wednesday workshop today. And Nancy, you guys, most of you know who she is. You've probably received an email solicitation from her at some point.
For one of my team members, for sure.
Yeah, or someone from a team member. Nancy is one of the best in the business on the whole idea of I think, and hopefully I won't get this wrong, but really representing churches to find new leadership at all levels, but specifically we're going to talk about the senior level leadership. And really helping churches cope with change, deal with different issues that they might be going through, do health assessments and all that kind of thing. And what I really love about NL Moore as an organization is they really get us. They really get EFCA. And there's some great organizations out there too. And so it's not just like there's only Nancy. But I think Nancy's unique in that she understands EFCA ethos and groups like EFCA. And so I think because of that, she is uniquely gifted, especially with her experience, to speak into some of the things that I think will be helpful for us to understand today. So I tried to set you up as best as possible with a little bit of words there, but Nancy, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about your background and what exactly NL Moore does?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. It's so good to be with you all. And I just appreciate Tim's invitation to come and talk about these topics that's near and dear to my heart and what I do every day. So it's great to have this forum to be in a dialogue with you. So I have been consulting with churches since 2006, 14 years now. And before that, I was on the staff of an EFCA church here in suburban St. Paul, Minnesota, where I live and with my family. I have 2 grown kids and a husband and a cat who now gets all of our love and affection. But I came to faith as a college student through Campus Crusade for Christ, but I immediately got plugged into a local church and was discipled, grew up in my faith, and I really experienced a call to ministry. And I served in a local church for almost 20 years, primarily in the area of adult discipleship and small groups. And so EFCA is kind of my home tribe, but I do work across other evangelical denominations and across the country. And we work in 4 different ways. Pastoral search is a big part of what we do. Succession and succession planning, the planned transition of long-term leaders. We do congregational assessment and team assessments. We use an evidence-based approach in our work, and so the assessments play a big role in how we understand a congregation, its health and its culture. And then we do coaching. So coach with boards, leaders, teams, and so forth, usually around change management. So that's a little bit about what I do. And I love the local church. One of the reasons I love the EFCA is that, you know, it really respects the fact that each church is a unique and distinct body of Christ, and it's self-governing, and it gets to figure out its voice and how it wants to express itself. And I really resonate with that. And I love the EFCA because of that uniqueness. It's really more of a movement or an affiliation than a denomination. And it's important.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. So I just want to jump into this. We had we've been living with the pandemic, and it's so crazy because we have that, and then obviously the terrible killing of George Floyd, and the events that have come out of that, and now we've got the nation is really kind of like gripped with that, and obviously many people in our churches are wrestling with exactly what to do and everything else. But the pandemic still hasn't gone away. It's kind of faded into the background somewhat, but it's still there. And David, you were talking about that earlier. I mean, it's still in the forefront. I guess the main question I want to ask you is, how has this new world, whatever you want to call it, how has it changed the whole issue of hiring for pastoral positions?
Yeah. Well, I think the one thing that I would say, just in my communication with church leaders across the country, that I'm hearing is that the kingdom of God doesn't stop moving forward because of the pandemic. It's like, so in a lot of ways, the work of the church, whether it would be leading the church, the need for pastoral leadership, it remains. So there is a consistency there and a reality there. But I do think the process by which the hiring takes place is definitely shifting. And people are having to be creative in how they accomplish the work that's needed to be accomplished. But I really thought we would see a larger slowdown than we have. We're continuing to see churches reach out, talk to us about hiring. And on the other side of it too, I really thought we would see fewer candidates be open to conversation. And in a couple of processes, like I think it was 2 weeks ago, we did a candidate presentation. 6 candidates. Usually we present candidates in pools of 3 to 5, but we had just really an abundance of really good candidates. And so I think that things are still happening. They're just happening in light of something that is shifting the way in which questions are asked, in which processes are unfolding, and in the way in which the church is having to discern. They're having to take it to different places, and that's been really interesting to see.
Yeah, so talk about that a little bit. I mean, what specifically, what is it looking like? How is the process changing?
Yeah, well, I think that in the past, the questions that were being asked were much more tailored to traditional church. The church is a building, the church is a place. And I don't think any of us as followers of Jesus really believe that, but I think that like the praxis, like it kind of defaults to that idea. And I think the reality of the church as the people is becoming clearer, like the view of what's the role of pastor. What do we need from our pastor? I think churches are asking different kinds of questions than they did 6 months ago.
And what answers are they getting? I mean, if those are the questions they're asking, what conclusions are they arriving at?
Yeah, I think they're really thinking about pastors who know how to collaborate well with teams and with others, whether they're lay teams or staff teams. I think the idea of collaboration, the technological abilities of pastors is a question mark that is being raised by search teams. How have they had to adapt in their current setting to this reality? How are they dealing with that? How are they continuing to deliver leadership and vision and care and shepherding to the people in light of all of this? What are they doing? And how are they leveraging others? The adaptability factor. In doing congregational assessment, we use an instrument that was designed by my mentor, Russ Crabtree, wrote a book, The Elephant in the Boardroom. A lot of you know he was one of the forerunners of the conversation around succession planning in the church. And he owns a congregational health assessment and has used that in more than 25 years of consulting. And the only factor that has been proven to be correlated to an organization's ability to achieve its goals and objectives is flexibility. And we've known this through 25 years of
Mm.
studies, got all this data. I think today the reality of that for the church is so much more, they're more cognizant of, what it means to have to be adaptable, what it means to have to be flexible. You have congregations who had been filled with wonderful tradition that people loved, and all of a sudden it's gone. And church leaders are saying, I don't know that we are going to go back to the way it was. I don't know that it's ever going to go back to the way it was. And so what does that mean for us? And they're really looking to, even in the selection process, candidates to be part of that conversation. So I think the ideas of adaptability, the collaboration. Another big one is communication across a variety of different platforms. They're wanting to see candidates, not only their video presentation, right, but they're also wanting to see their written presentation. And how are they inspiring people, not only through this medium, but through the medium of the written word. And of course, it's so important in ministry. Every pastor I know wants to be in the room with people, because there's energy that you get when you're communicating that comes from people. And I think, Tim, you posted something. It was a article or a video from a guy who talked about preaching to an empty room. And I mean, it was so good. The idea of thinking about the people that you're communicating with. And well, think about how hard that is for a candidate, when they're not only unable to be present, like they don't even know who the people in the room are. They don't know their needs. They don't know their personalities and their challenges. And I think that it makes the process more difficult, but I think it's causing churches to ask questions about the role of pastor and how are we going to flex to our new reality and call a pastor who can help us on that journey of moving forward and not trying to go back.
So, I mean, you said, there's some very important stuff that you just said, because you talked about flexibility. Yeah. You talked about collaboration. Let's lean into that a little bit. I mean, collaborative, why is that important, and how is that different from the past?
Well, I think in the past, the idea, if you are a multi-staff church, and to be frank, most of the churches that we work with are multi-staff. Usually when you get about 200, 250, you've got multiple full-time staff that are working together in a church, and people come around a table together, and there's energy that comes in that moment. And now church leaders they can't direct the work of the people because they can't see it happening, right? You're not going to lead by walking around. You got to figure out a different way to exercise oversight and collaboration and teaming, and it's virtual. And I think it's really revealed for some churches, like how much their staff had been missing because they've been decentralized. And I think for a couple of clients that we've worked with, they've really noted, like, we didn't realize how little teaming our team did until they were decentralized. And all of the avenues for them to come together are new. Like they were working side by side. It was like parallel play. The whole team is sitting in offices or at desks doing their work alongside each other, but they're not coordinating. And when you're virtual, you have to coordinate because you're using technology, and everybody has to kind of be in that conversation of how is this going to come off? What part are you going to play, especially when you're doing virtual handoff? It just adds to the complexity. And I think it's raising some really good questions, and these challenges, within every challenge, there's an opportunity. Right. And I think that the opportunities that are being revealed for the church to become better, for teams to truly collaborate, and for leaders to enter in with an understanding or maybe even a clarified sense of what's happening in that church as far as collaboration goes. And so how steep is that hill they're going to have to climb?
Yeah, because those are skills that it's kind of like we don't train for those. Like, I mean, seminaries don't necessarily train for those. Some of those skills you can kind of understand, but those are some serious gifts, like in terms of collaboration. even flexibility is a mindset. You know, one of the things that we talked about, and I just said this when this thing started, is like, hey, every church, when this whole thing kicked off, it's like, guess what? Every church is now a church plant. They have to think like a church plant, because everything that you thought you knew is out the window. In fact, even the church planting books, like, just go throw those away now too, because we have churches planting right now in the midst of this. And like, you can't read a typical church planting book and think that that's going to be the recipe for how you're going to do it. But, you know, another thought on this too is, and so maybe your feedback on this, like, it seems like, especially for the smaller church, maybe the solo pastor, what we might call the normal size church. We've used that language a lot. Like, we've started what we call the normal church network. You know, it's not a small church. It's actually 95% of the churches in America. So a normal church of, you know, 150 or whatever, somewhere in there, give or take. A lot of times when people were looking for a position like that, they would look for what the pastor did on Sunday, right? There's Sunday abilities. But now it seems like you're saying, like, what these other abilities and skills during the week are becoming much more important.
Yeah, and I think it's that idea again that the church is not a place, it's a people.
Mm-hmm.
And we've, you know, the walls came down when COVID hit, and the church had to be decentralized and has to be decentralized today. You know, the church isn't waiting to come back together. The church is still together. It's just different. And I think that mindset, that thought process is revealing to the body itself, at least from what has been reflected to me through search teams. Now, I'm not, you know, in all of these churches. Obviously, I'm working from home too, but I am working with a number of teams across the country. But I think the reality that, you know, how does our pastor relate with us? How are we being empowered to be the church in our community when the needs now all of a sudden are apparent in ways that they weren't before? And even the empathy, you know, one of the things that people talk about is how sad they are at not being able to come together. And like, when we do focus groups and we do what we call our intake, where we're getting to know the congregation, we've had to do those virtually. People have loved coming together in forums like this and just talking about what they love about their church, who they are, about their culture. And so I would say, even to small church pastors, you know, yeah, your church is decentralized, but it doesn't mean you can't do things like this to deliver care and to help people care for one another, to bring them together using technology. Set up a Zoom call and say, you know, let's come together and pray together. Let's share what's going on in our life. Let's do a go round. And giving people that opportunity to connect empowers them, and even, you know, making them aware of the needs of others. I think in really powerful ways. And it's such an easy thing now that we've done it a little bit, but I think any church of any size can exercise those kinds of activities that help connect with people. And pastors don't think about it because, like you said, it's not something that you ever trained for. But if they're willing to flex and give it a shot, I think the dividends could be tremendous.
Flexibility, communication, empathy, and again, you know, we believe that preaching ability is of course important. I mean, that does fall into the communication aspect, but there's so many other types of communication. Are you guys going to, as you've looked at this, you know, when you do a health assessment, have you thought about the need that you may have to change how you measure health based on this now?
Yeah, there's been a couple of things that we've seen. Well, the company, again, Russ's company that owns the congregational health assessment, had put a hold until this month on doing any, because they don't have any way to discern how the impact of the pandemic might skew data. So we're actually just starting, but they did add a COVID module to ask questions to gain some insight into kind of the mindset of the taker, of the assessment taker. And I think that'll be really helpful. But we're also seeing in the assessments of candidates, I don't know, we use two, one's DISC, a personality assessment, and one is strengths, to get an understanding of people and how they operate. But one of the strengths, which is behavioral based, which is, it shifts with your context, right? Personality stays more consistent over time, but your strengths, that's behavioral, a behavioral assessment, is going to change depending upon circumstances. Well, we're seeing an
Mm,
executing strength called focus come up
mm,
a lot. Normally, it's only like 1 or 2% of the total population that would customarily have that in their top five. But we had a team meeting last week and we realized how many pastors that we're assessing are having focus show up in their top five, which means they're having to really dive in and try to figure stuff out. Like they're
wow.
focusing in on issues. And um, so I think from even an evidence-based standpoint of how we assess people, assess churches, um, yeah, you got to kind of hold it with an open hand. And, we do both quantitative and qualitative. We also talk to people. We want to hear their story and understand it in real time, based on their reality. So we're not just looking at data points. We're trying to synthesize the two pieces together. But I think the story aspect is probably as important or more important right now than the data, because the data is going to be influenced by our circumstances.
Yeah, and I just think that that's very interesting. You said that personality stays relatively static,
Right.
but strengths shift based on the context and the situation.
For sure.
And focus has emerged because it's been demanded out of leadership. And I think that's really important because, see, and I can't pretend to know why the people that are on this call are on this call. It could just be because they like, being with us every Wednesday. It could be because they're interested in hiring and they want to know what to look for when hiring. It could also be because if they're honest, they're thinking maybe they want to move on. And
Hmm.
so they want to get some tips on how to present themselves. And we'll talk about that part in a little while in terms of looking at the other side. But that's a very fascinating insight, that whereas focus wasn't really a thing before, but it's crisis management is what a lot of it is, right? It's the ability to say, okay, we have to be, and Bob Osborne talked about this a lot when we first started. We talked about flexibility, we talked about adaptability, and the problem is it wasn't necessarily in the cultures of a lot of the churches that we were interacting
Right.
with, but it had to be, or they're dead, right? Or they're just going to lose all ability to function. And so I just think that I just want to take note of that, because that ability that is there, but maybe was dormant and not needed, rose to the surface and may be something that, as churches look at hiring, given the strange nature of the world that we could be facing, who knows for how long, and whatever other kind of curveballs might, because I think the big picture too is and I was listening to another guy talk about this, with globalization, or the internet and everything else, we're affected by a lot more factors than we used to be. The things can turn on a dime a lot faster. Something can happen in Minneapolis and the whole world changes, right? And so a trait like focus, because of the circumstances that aren't going to change. In other words, we're not going to be less connected than before. We're going to continue to be more connected, which means we're going to have more susceptibility to events like this that radically shift how we have to do things. I would think that a trait like focus might continue to be really important and should be factored into a church when they're looking at a leader.
It's a good question, and I think it'll be interesting to keep watching and see what happens as things morph into whatever is next, and kind of what comes from that. But I do think, when you do assessments on candidates, and I'm a big advocate for, giving yourselves, if you're in the hiring chair, giving yourself some kind of objective measurement that gives you insight into that candidate and how they bring their gifts to bear. And again, it's not just looking at the data. You got to have the story of the person too, so that it makes sense and that you understand what's happening in their life that might be pulling that up. But there are strengths that feed into the ideas of flexibility and communication, and even strategic thinking about creative problem solving. That's another key area that I think a lot of churches find themselves needing right now, is like leaders who can creatively problem solve. And there are personality types that have more inclination in that direction. But there are also strengths that can feed into that too. And how people get things done in
Yeah.
this day and age. So it'll be fun to keep an eye on all of those things and to see if it shifts long term. Our team is kind of interested in that as well, and is tracking it.
Yeah. So then So thinking about this then from maybe the other side, and I guess, we talked about that a little bit, but let me ask you this question. If somebody is thinking like, if they're, because there may be somebody on the call right now going, you know what, I don't want to tell anybody, but I'm thinking about making a move. How do they know, like, is it wise to make a monumental move like this in such a time of uncertainty, or should they wait until things have calmed down? What advice would you give someone who's maybe they felt a little bit dislodged
Mhm.
from this, through this event, and it's caused them to think about some things? Is that just kind of like, should they, what would you say to a person like that? Should they wait, or is it the Lord? And I don't know how you answer that, but I just think it's an important question, because I know people are wondering, like, what do I do? And am I thinking the right way here?
Well, something that I often say is that when in doubt, add some process. I think that sometimes when you take a few steps forward in discernment, if you're seeking to discern what's God directing me to, Lord, how are you guiding me forward? Take a few steps forward and see if that doesn't inform you about what God has for you. It could be that doorways open and relationships come into view, and all of a sudden something is in front of you, and then you can ask the question, is this it or not? But I think we have to trust that God is big enough to override the voices of circumstance in our life, and whether it's COVID or other things, to give us the wisdom we seek. It's the verse I pray every day is, if anyone lacks wisdom, all you have to do is ask God, and he'll give generously to you without finding fault. I'm like, yay, sign me up. I pray that every day. God, give me your wisdom. And I think if you are discerning or feeling that stirring inside of you, I think you should explore it. I would say that to anybody. I always think, if you think God's prompting you in some way, take a couple of steps and see what he reveals through that process. The inaction or the fear, I just don't think is what should drive decision making. Now, with that said, this is a unique time, and you also have to exercise sensitivity to the community of which you are currently leading. If you are currently a lead pastor of a church, and for example, we worked with a pastor in a search process in Indiana, and the selected candidate was in Washington State, and he had just been selected as the finalist right when COVID hit, and he had like 5 people in his church community that were in the hospital. Washington State in the Seattle area was one of the first areas where COVID hit, and he basically said, look, I feel the call of God to come, but right now I have to like triage my congregation. I have to ask you, to press pause on this, because I have to pay attention to what God has given me to lead. And that's this congregation. And so we did. We just all joined together and said, yes, let's press pause. That is the wise thing to do. It's the right thing to do. And he's finally going into candidate with the congregation later this month. And that was a 3-month pause. Now, the congregation that was calling him still had needs, and they had to decide, yeah, we're willing to wait. But they knew that it was the right thing. And so I think again, it's sort of like discerning in real time, like, Lord, what is that wise thing? What is the wisdom that you're giving me? And what do other people who are part of the conversation say as well? And discern that together. But I think be open and candid in the conversation. And even if you have questions, if you're in conversation with a church and you say, I'm not sure, that it is my time to lead, but I have been feeling the Lord stirring something in my soul, and I'm seeking to take a few steps forward of obedience to discern what that might be. The churches that I work with anyway would all be like, great. If we come to the end of our conversation and we discern the right thing for you to do is to stay where you're at, praise God. It's clarifying. It's clarifying for us, and it's clarifying for you. But I think sometimes the fear that we're going to disappoint people, we're going to disappoint our current congregation, or we're going to seemingly promise something to a church that we're taking a few steps toward without really knowing that we know. I mean, I don't know anybody who makes that initial call or has those first couple of conversations that has some level of conviction, this is where I'm to go. I mean, maybe once or twice in 14 years has somebody said, I really feel like this is my call. More often than not, somebody will say that, and I'll be like, well, it's a two-way street. So let's make sure that, you feel called to the church. Great. The church also has to feel called to you. So, that's that mutuality there. So let's continue to discern and hold it before the Lord. But, that for me is more of a red flag. Like if somebody's so convinced that they are supposed to go to a particular place, you know, that I think you have to be careful of. But taking
Yeah.
steps forward in discernment, I think that's wise.
Okay. Yeah. You guys, maybe you guys have heard of Bob Beal, and I've listened to some of his stuff, and he had this quote that I always stuck in my head: always put process between opportunity and decision.
Yeah.
And I really like that. But when you say process, what do you mean? I mean, like, what does that look like to take a few steps? I mean, what are the few steps that you take to, because, you take a few steps and you reassess, which is why. So you're saying, you're not saying, oh, don't, if you're feeling something, you're in a sense giving people permission. Now take a few steps, but what would those steps be?
Yeah, I think it could be a number of different things. I think you could have a conversation with somebody like me. You could have a conversation with a mentor or a dear friend to just kind of process with somebody. Pastors are so otherly focused. They are often the worst at their own spiritual formation. Like they don't take time to focus in on, Lord, what are you saying to me about my call, about my path, about my journey? They're really helping other people discern their path and their journey and what's next for them. And I think in those moments where they need some of that discernment, they can feel very alone or feel like, who am I supposed to talk to? It's lonely at the top. It is so lonely at the top of church leadership because, when you don't want to instill fear in the people in your community that you're somehow going to leave or whatnot. So I think finding a person that's a safe person to talk to, I think just kind of beginning to put some feelers out there, have a couple of confidential conversations with some trusted people and gather their feedback. What do you think about this? I'm feeling something stirring. What's your read on it?
Mhm.
And just listen. And I think part of our discernment is listening and praying and talking with your spouse. I really take seriously that thing that when the Lord joins the two together, one of the usually first interview with a candidate that I have, I'm like, what does your spouse think about this?
Yeah.
Because I think that you gain a lot of insight when you talk to your spouse about what's going on inside.
Well, and evidence-based, you talk about that a lot,
Yeah.
and that's part of it too, right? I mean, are there any evidence-based tools that you'd recommend that someone can do as part of the process?
Yeah, we often will take pastors usually through two assessments. Investing in a little bit of coaching for yourself. Different
Mhm.
coaches use different tools, but most of the time it's going to be something that's a personality assessment and something that might be a strengths or a behavioral based assessment. Um, and it's not intended to put you in a box, but it does open a dialogue about what you love to do in ministry, what you're gifted to do. I think that God gives us our gifts with intention. I think when he calls a pastor into pastoral ministry, he intends for the good gifts that he placed into that pastor to have expression in this world. What's the right place for that? How do you discern that? Well, if you think about a church or a call, a position, I think a lot of times pastors think I'm supposed to climb, I'm going to be a student pastor and then I'm going to be an associate and then I'm going to be a senior. And I'm not sure that's always the right thing. I think it's more, how am I wired and what's my best play? And then lean into that position and contribute all you can for kingdom advancement, from that chair. But if you think about a role that you're thinking about and your good gifts, if this hand represents your good gifts and all the gifts that God intends to have expression in the world that he put into you, if you can find a place where the fit is maybe 70% or better, right? You're going to feel really satisfied there. Now, somebody might fit like this, somebody might fit like this, but what you want to avoid is pursuing or running towards something that you feel is some kind of aspiration you've created for yourself, but it may not align with your giftedness.
Mhm.
All this to say, I think when you're thinking about making a job change or finding the right fit for you, the more you can understand yourself and become aware of who you are and how God wired you, the better chance you have of really finding that position that's going to allow you to live your gifts in freedom and
Yeah.
so that the body is saying, wow, we are so glad you're here. You're bringing your gifts to the table in the way we desire them to be brought. And when you have poor fit, the church is the church, and it's going to say, why aren't you being the pastor we want you to be? And you're like, yeah, but I got all this great stuff. Why won't you let me deliver that to you in the way I want to deliver it to you? And you end up having short stays, hurt feelings. You've moved your family across the country, and now you got to move again. And, those kind of things. We want to help avoid all of that. But I think investing in yourself as a pastor, understanding your gifts and strengths, so that when you're in the process of selection of the position you're going to take or pursue, you can do that from a position of being informed about yourself. And again, pastors don't do that. They want to inform everybody else about their gifts, but they forget to focus in on the way that God made them.
Well, and on the other side too, I mean, how many times have we made just bad hires because it was our buddy or somebody, that we kind of knew, and we thought, well, let's just do, without using evidence-based or without really taking the time to put the process in. You said something to me at one point, I don't know when this was, but you said, Tim, in every job, no matter what it is, you'll love about 70% and really not like about 30%.
Yeah.
And I really liked that, because I think that sets an expectation in the right way. Because I think sometimes we think if we don't wake up every day and like you're just feeling like, like what's his name from Chariots of Fire, I feel I feel
the pleasure of God. Yeah. When I run. Yeah.
It's like, well, you're not always going to feel God when you're running, because running can really suck sometimes and be painful. Yeah. And so, you feel, you're not always going to feel the pleasure of God. So I think that's important too, from an expectation standpoint, that just because you might be going through a season where it's just not the best, but it doesn't mean that you got to split.
Yeah. And I think you're hitting on something that is so important for pastors and for church leaders to understand. There's 30% of any job, anywhere, whether you're in ministry or out of ministry, that you do not because you love to do it, but because you have to do. It's part of the have to do, or, I wish somebody else could do, but hey, it's on my job description and it's going to fall to me. And it may be the things that you let slide down the pile, you procrastinate on it because you don't really want to do it. It's not part of your strong gift mix, but it's there. It's a reality. There's no job.
It's going to be in every job.
Every job, every position.
Even if you got your dream, even if you got your dream job, there's going to be a part of it you go, really, I have to do that.
Yeah.
So I just think that's a cool. I just remembered that, and I thought that was good.
Well,
so
and I love the fact too. Let me hit on one other thing. That 30% is different for every individual. It's dependent upon how you're wired, right? If you're fitting like this is the 30% that you're not going to like. If you're wired like this is the 30%. And I think that you have to remember the uniqueness and the intention with which God gave you your gifts. Like, find that place where the majority of your 70% is great. 30% can do, have to do, don't really want to do, but there it is, but focus in on fitting with the 70, and you're going to have more satisfaction and more joy, I think, in what you're delivering week in and week out.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have a few questions here. Stephen is asking, and what changes in the hiring process are you seeing due to COVID? And are you concerned about less ideal placements due to less thorough hiring processes, if that's the case? So if the assumption is that the process is less thorough, are you concerned that there's going to be mismatches or wrong placements?
Yeah. In our process, I mean, we're pretty thorough in our process. Whether it's COVID or not COVID, that doesn't really change. I think from a church run search, I'm not really sure how that the COVID might be impacting that. But it is having to change. We're doing more on video longer, but I have a very strong word to any of you pastors who are thinking of looking for something, and also for churches that whether we just pitch to them and talk with them about what we do, or whether we actually work with them. Never hire anybody that you have not spent adequate amount of time with personally in the room. Like, I would never physical time with, even with social distancing, like if you have to get in a car and drive, get in a car and drive. If you can get on a plane with your mask and your gloves and, and go and be present, you can meet in a park. You can meet in somebody's backyard. You can meet in the fellowship hall or an auditorium and be 10 feet apart from one another, but you got to be in a room with people. There have been too many times over 14 years that I have seen candidate that, maybe they're interviewing 5 candidates, and candidate 1, candidate 2, candidate 3 on the video interview, they get in the room and it flips, because there's just something that can't be discerned on video that you can discern when you are in the room with somebody, both ways, both with candidate and to church and church to candidate. So any church that would want to shortcut that process and be like, hey, we're in love with you after watching your videos. And so I would just, if I were a candidate, I would say, I have to be in the room with you. Like, it's a deal breaker for me.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're not gonna marry the person just because you saw them on Christian Mingle.
You
You gotta
go out on a date. Yep.
Yeah, you gotta, and it is with these candidates. I mean, you might get in the room with the person like, this guy, he smells, or he just looks, I mean, you just don't know. You can't make that kind of. And I think, although I never forget, Bill Hybels, and it's obviously, sad what happened to him, but he had some great stuff that he would talk about in this regard. And I remember a quote he had where he said, if you're a position of an executive level position, whether you should hang on to someone or you should fire a person, whether you should do that or not by how you feel when they walk into the room. And that was a very terrible statement, but or I shouldn't say terrible. It was a stark statement, but it was very real in the sense that when that person walks the room, you're like, ugh. It's like, that's not going to go away, right? Unless there's some underlying conflict. And I thought that was wise. But you can't do that or even determine that if they don't have the person physically present. So what you're saying is, no matter what we do with the Zoom and how much we've been able to shrink the world, there's just certain things you're going to have to do in person.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I think that even that presence, when you think about that when 2 or 3 are gathered, he's there in the midst of you, that the Lord is with you. And there is something that we all know and have experienced when we are with brothers and sisters in Christ in the room.
Yeah.
And it can carry over to something like this, but there's no true exchange for that presence. And I just think that's a non-negotiable in the hiring process.
No, that's great. Jack is asking, what are 2 or 3 things that a pastor looking for a transition should not do? All of us have friends that talk with us looking for advice. So what are some things to avoid?
For a pastor who is looking for a position?
Yeah. Like if they're looking to transition, what are some things they should just be very careful of doing?
So I would not put your resume out there on a bunch of websites. That is like not a good way to find the right position, because search teams they don't really know you. They're just looking at, things on a paper, and 9 times out of 10, when someone's a poor fit for a hire, it didn't have anything to do with what was on their resume, or you'd never hired them in the first place. It had everything to do with how they show up at the table when they arrived, right? So, I think that a lot of times when you just post your resume out there on a bunch of job boards, hoping that somebody is going to fall in love with you based on that, like, it's the wrong approach. Instead, I advocate, make a start list of who are 25 people that you could reach out to that you believe are connected to others in ministry, and just come up with your elevator story and call those people and say, hey, can I buy you a cup of coffee? Could I send you a Starbucks card for, a half hour of your time on the Zoom call here? And everybody in the church, I think, is so generous. I mean, all of you have been generous with me and my team as we've networked over time with positions. People want to help you, but make a start list. Who are the people that I could contact and reach out to? People like in Tim's position, district superintendents, other church leaders, people who lead larger influential churches in different regions, and just ask them, here's who I am. Here's kind of what I'm thinking. Who do you know that I should talk to? And I think that's the right way to approach. It's maybe a bit more labor intensive, but what it yields is a much better match or potential match. That's the process we take. Like, you won't see the jobs that we represent posted on church staffing websites. Why? Because what it does is it generates unqualified interest. Well, those people are still made in the image of God, and I still need to spend time with them and treat them with respect. And so we prefer to use a more direct approach where we're just out talking to people and telling the story of the church, telling the story of the opportunity, and trusting that the Lord works through that. And he does, he's so faithful. But
You know,
that would be one thing.
yeah, and I think that's one of the things I hope to accomplish. We hope to accomplish here. I mean, like I'm looking at Chris Calvert, and Chris is finishing up an interim position, and I think it's okay to say that he's interested in seeing what's next, and that's probably okay to say that, Chris, to everybody. And I think that what I kind of wish we would have at EFCA West is more of that relational thing where we felt like we could just kind of, without going, okay, well, hey, because I almost feel like it's a liability. Like, well, here's this guy, but if it doesn't work out, don't blame me. It's like, hey, look, here's a guy. We know this guy a little bit. Here's his resume. If you want to talk to him, it's on you. But those relationships are important that we build together. And I think that's part of what we're doing here. So there is like a sense of at least somewhat baseline trust that hey, I can, from what I know about this guy, hey, talk to him, or this woman, talk to her about this position or whatever else. And I think, that also spills into to Dave's. By the way, you're getting more questions on the chat box than like any other Zoom workshop that we've done. So hats off to you. Does NL Moore partner with EFCA Pastor Search? I think the answer to that is not officially, but I mean, there's some cross-pollination. If you guys aren't aware of Pastor Search, that's what we have. It's EFCA program. You guys really operate at a different level than Pastor Search. It's kind of a matchmaking service. And even that's a challenge because there's only so much that we can get from one candidate. So I guess I'd say that we don't really do a whole lot with that. You guys don't do a whole lot with that.
We don't interface with it. The only time we do is if we have a EFCA client that says we would like you to, interface with Pastor Search. Most of the churches that we work with that are EFCA work with us because they haven't had good luck with Pastor Search. Like it's not yielded the quality candidates that they are looking for, or the matches that they've received haven't felt like they're the right thing. And so they're looking for something that's more tailored and customized to who they are. So, but I think for some churches, it could be a helpful thing. I just think it's probably less predictive that it's going to be helpful than the approach that we take.
Well, and honestly, this isn't really, I'm not intending to give you a plug here, but if you think about the economics of it, I mean, and without getting into the specifics of what you charge, but obviously there's a fee for finding a pastor. Yeah. And, so if a pastor makes like 50 grand, that's kind of low, but let's just say 50 grand a year, whatever. If a pastor makes 50 grand a year and you charge $10,000 or whatever for that, people go, oh my gosh, $10,000. Well, we can save all kinds of money. Well, if you get the wrong guy, after 3 years, you paid $150,000 for the wrong person. And then you got to go out and do it all over again. And I really, when you're thinking about the senior leadership of the church or an executive level leadership, I mean, it's like pay a little bit now or just get taken to the cleaners later, right?
Well, and I think, the reality is it's kingdom resources. And so we're cognizant of that too. Like, I don't want, I want to help when the help is needed. If you can do it on your own, great, do it on your own. You know what I mean? Save the money. But it reminded me, I went in to talk with a church search team and board one time, and they were giving me a tour of the building beforehand, and they had just put in this new sound system. And I'm like, that is just amazing. I mean, it was just an amazing renovation that they had done in their worship center. And it was really beautiful. We get in the room and there was one guy on the board who was just really, I don't know why we would pay money to do this and so forth. And I just asked him, I said, how much did you pay for that sound system? Like, you pay me less to find the pastor who's going to shape the future of your congregation for a decade or more. You're going to pay me less than what you paid for that sound system so that you have good quality sound week in and week out. If, where's the priority? Like, I just put it back to you. And he was just kind of like, I never thought of it like that. You're right. And he immediately was like, nope, I'm going to stop talking about the cost.
Yeah. And again, right. And I just threw out those numbers. That's not necessarily a reflection of your ratio or whatever, but one way or the other. But I know that I was, you got EFCA West hired you and that's how I ended up here. And then we turned around, Compass turned around and hired you for their next pastor search. And whether someone uses you or not, it's the idea. And Bob Osborne, Bob made a good point a little earlier. Like really, pastor search and what you do, they're two separate things. They really are.
They are.
There's not really so much of the pastor search is an opportunity for kind of candidates we know or that want to place them, put themselves out there to be matched. And there is an algorithm and everything else. And it does serve a certain person. We're not down on pastor search. Don't hear that at all. But it can only go so far, and you really are on your own at that point. So like when someone comes to us and says, "Hey, what do you think?" It's like, "Hey, I can only tell you what I know, but I don't have the, we don't do that."
Mm-hmm.
One other thing on this too, though, that I think is a nuance here that you and I talked about earlier in preparation for this conversation. We talked about the whole issue of onboarding, right? So let's say you get onboarded, or you're onboarding somebody, and now it's like it's in this format. What are the potential pitfalls there?
I think this is probably the biggest challenge that we're just now seeing some of the candidates that we're hiring during this COVID season coming into their positions and making the transitions. And so onboarding is the next phase, kind of that startup phase. And I think it's a huge challenge. How are pastors going to be effectively onboarded, getting to know the board, getting to know the teams, let alone the congregation and the people, right? And so I think churches are really going to face a challenge. And we've been brainstorming on our team on some different ways to do that. I think using technology is one, also using the physical space to do smaller gatherings, especially now that many states have opened up so you can have like up to half capacity in the room at one time. And even for candidating, we've gotten some creative ways of getting smaller groups of congregants together, especially in large churches, to meet the pastor and to not shake hands, but to at least be physically present in the room with them and hear them and their spouse talk more personally. But onboarding, I think that it's going to take some creativity on team building, really thinking about how are we connecting this pastor and giving them a chance to connect in with the congregation. Here's the other thing that I was watching. Have any of you ever watched the show Survivor? Like, it's these people, they go out on this island, they play all these games. And anyway, our family has been binge watching Survivor reruns on Hulu during the COVID time. But I was watching a couple of the former contestants say that when they got back from the island, it took them like several months to trust again. Like, they couldn't trust their spouse. Anytime a coworker would say something, they're like, "I think you're, lying to me," or whatever.
Trying to get me off the island.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, there's an effect. There was an effect of being in that game and being so removed from the regular world that when they came back into the regular world, there was a cautiousness and a fear and a, tentativeness in relationship to others. I think the church is going to experience something like that when we all come back together again. And so think about being a new pastor in a church that not only is coming back together again in new ways, but now also I think there's kind of this survivor effect. Like, all right, we may have survived the whole COVID thing, but I don't know that I'm ready to trust being in the same space with you, or I don't know that I want to shake your hands. I don't know that I want to give hugs. I don't, there's just a fear factor that I think will impact some of that too. And so onboarding in this season, post-COVID, or, COVID and post-COVID, I think is going to be really challenging for churches, and getting creative. But I think you got to have the conversation that it is going to be different. It's going to feel weird, and churches have to address that, and boards especially.
And it's just something that it's not obvious necessarily.
Yeah.
So then I want to make sure, and Dave was asking, what are the pros and cons of, and we only have a few minutes left, but hiring in-house versus outside the church. And I don't know if that's been changed by COVID or not, but I mean, there's obviously some universal principles there,
Yeah, I don't think it has changed because of COVID. I think that it depends on the circumstance of the church, the health and vitality of the church. If a church is in a transformational posture where it's really healthy, I think you have all the options. You could hire internally, you could hire externally. I think that when a church is in a position of challenge and there is systemic dysfunction, they're sick, or they're really stuck, oftentimes the internal candidate isn't enough of a catalyst, right? That thing that can kind of elicit change in the system in order to be a good, viable option for the church. So I think, again, you have to look at what is the circumstance that we would be inviting that pastor into. Do they have the right mix of gifts to be able to accomplish what the church needs to see accomplished? And if they do, then I think you could definitely look at that. If they don't, then I think it would be a really poor choice to encourage a brother in Christ to take a position that you're really setting them up for a failure. Like they're not going to be successful, so they're going to be the unintentional interim. And I don't want that for anybody. I mean, we all have heard the horror stories of pastors who took a job and they thought, oh, this is going to be great, and they just were not well suited for the position or the needs of the church at that season, and their family pays the cost, and they pay the cost, and there's a stop and a start to the momentum of mission every time you have a transition of leadership. But when you have a poor transition or a poor hire or an unintentional mishire, the costs are huge. They're financial, they're human, they're spiritual. There's just there's so many layers there, and I think that's why I'm so passionate about what we do. Is that I want to help churches get it right, because I think we do, those of us who feel called to serve the church, the most important thing in the world, right? It's plan A. There's no plan B. We got to see the church thrive, and I love getting up and going to work every day and helping church leaders like you, be in the right conversations and make those good choices. So.
Yeah, well, and so I can tell you, and again, I want you to get a chance to just share if someone's here today and if they're looking, potentially feeling like they might be moving on, can they talk to you? And then if there's a church, because I want to just say this, when I was received the call to come here to EFCA West, I've been in my church for 12 years. And I kept thinking to myself, how am I going to tell them, how are they going to understand, and what are they going to, and I'm going to tell you, when I stood up on the stage and I explained the process, and I said, you guys, listen, here's what happened at this date. And I got an email and I just said, I'll just answer it. And I explained in the process and how many candidates were involved. And then that got whittled down to that, and then this and this and this, and the interviews and the inventories. And I shared with them the process. When I got done, the people said, we're sad to see you go, but this is undeniably the hand of God. Because it wasn't like it was seen as, oh, you're frustrated or you're, tired or you just want to jump at the next thing. It's like, no, this happened, right? And I think that's even a gift that you can give the place that you're leaving, or even with the person that you're hiring. Just go, well, we found this guy on church staffing and his resume lined up really great. He has a good, it's like, no, this is the process we took because we do care. And I think it helps provide a ton of legitimacy to your hiring. So that's my personal testimony on it. But tell us then, what do you do if there's a candidate, and if there's a church that's, how can we engage you?
Yeah. So the reality is we do not work for individuals. We work for churches. So the clients we have are churches. We will occasionally do coaching with an individual pastor, but vast majority of the time we are just hired by a church. But in the process of working for churches in this thing, we talk to candidates all the time, or people who are discerning. Should I even think about what's next? And can you help me? And of course we want to help you. And there are lots of times where I'll even say, I don't have anything right now that I think would be a fit for you, but talk to this person, or I know this church is looking for something. You're welcome to go and kind of explore it on your own. But I try to be generous and be kingdom minded, right? That we're all on the same team in essence. And so any of you who are wanting just to talk with somebody, if I can be of help to you with one of the projects we're working on about 21 at any given time, you are welcome to shoot me an email, nancy@nlmore.com. I'm happy to be of help to you, or one of my teammates could be of help to you as well. If I can't be of help to you, I'll definitely keep you in mind and, try to do what I can to facilitate your connection with other opportunities that we're not representing. So.
Yeah, great. Hey, thanks so much, Nancy. That's awesome. Hey, two things real quick. Tonight is the prayer event that EFCA is having, and it's an online thing, so United in Prayer. So make sure that if you could be at that. Kevin Complin's going to be involved in that. And then secondly, next week, Thrive is having a online conference as well. I think we sent you some stuff about that in an email. So if you want to be a part of that, I think it's fantastic. I love what those guys do. I highly recommend it. And I think it's next Wednesday and Thursday. Their speaker lineup is awesome. So definitely encourage you to check that out. And they've been a good friend to us as well. So I appreciate them. Hey, let me pray for us real quick, and then we'll let you guys go. Father, we are so grateful that you brought along people like Nancy Moore, who are gifted and skilled to help us discern next steps and to make the right fit. Thank you for Nancy, the fact that she knows how people work and how they function so well. And I just want to pray for everybody on this call that if there's a stirring inside, or perhaps there's a position they need to fill that's causing them all this angst, God, that this would be something that would be a catalyst for them to move them forward a few steps, to clear the fog, and that, God, the right person in the right position would have a tremendous kingdom impact. We thank you for the Evangelical Free Church of America, for what it stands for. We thank you for the gospel, our commitment to the gospel, and our commitment to being missionaries in our own context, and the freedom to be able to do that under the guidance of your Spirit. And it's a beautiful tribe that we have, and we thank you and ask that it would increase. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Hey, thank you so much, everybody. Be available on YouTube, so we'll just look for that, and we'll see you later on.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Nancy. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.